choice. It's a game design principle that plagues almost every video game today. Now, when I say choice, what I mean is a game giving you an option that can change the entire experience for better or worse. In Skyrim, you can choose to kill that annoying follower in the beginning of your mission. But later on, when you need a stealthy archer to assist you, he won't be there. State of Decay allows you to play as your favorite survivor in the crew. But if you get bit while on a mission, well, then it's time to find a new favorite. Unlike games today, retro games had little to no choice within them. Whether or not you died, killed an enemy, or simply stayed still, your next play session would be unaffected. So what game started the trend? Well, I would argue that The Legend of Zelda was the beginning of it all. I'm Cash Preble with Ghosty Games, and today I'm taking a look at The Legend of Zelda to see if it still holds up today. The Legend of Zelda is an interesting case when it comes to game design. Considering it's one of the first open-world games that were ever made, it's not too hard to see why. Before Zelda, we had such games as Sega's Jet Rocket and Atari's Adventure, but these games were of much smaller scope. Because of this, a lot of the design principles that we see in Zelda were tailor-made for its experience. Take for instance the Overworld. You as the player can explore through mountains, graveyards, deserts, forests, and fields without ever even collecting a sword. Almost every dungeon is accessible from the very start of the game. Players could stumble into an infinitely looping maze, come across fairies that fill your health, or walk into the 6th dungeon of the game all within the first hour of playing. Never before were players given the amount of freedom that is found within this game. But with this newfound freedom comes a lot of design obstacles that the team at Nintendo had to overcome. What's stopping you from never entering the cave and getting your first sword? And what stopped players from quitting before the game had even started? Well, one of the most commonly used game design principles is a sense of reward. One of the best examples of this comes from Nintendo's Super Mario Bros. Within the first screen of the game, we are presented with an obstacle that you are required to jump over. If a new player successfully jumps over the Goomba, they may land right on top of it. This action displays a point indicator and makes a satisfying smush sound. Right off the bat, we are rewarded for successfully completing the main mechanic of the game. For more on how video games use this principle, I encourage you to check out our video that goes more in depth on the subject. But for now, let's take a look at how The Legend of Zelda uses this principle. At the start of the game, the player is shown 3 paths along with a mysterious black hole in the wall. Moving towards the most out-of-place thing on the starting screen will reward you with your very own sword. This series of events teaches you the most fundamental mechanic of the game: exploration. Now, if The Legend of Zelda is anything, it's an adventure. Every place you visit, every dungeon you enter, and every puzzle you solve feels like a journey. This is important because if the first area you explored in a game outright killed you, you wouldn't feel so excited to discover the next. By rewarding the idea of exploration, you cause the player to want to discover that much more. But if the player has too much to discover right off the bat, the game can feel overwhelming. This is a feeling that Zelda tries to combat by pretending to limit the amount of exploration you're allowed to do. This is accomplished by withholding certain information to the player. Without knowing the proper sequence of directions, you may never be able to escape the looping maze. And without the proper experience, sneaking around certain enemies may seem to be impossible. These techniques of limiting a player's access had never been utilized in games prior. This is due to the fact that games had never been able to take advantage of exploration to this scale in gaming history. This is in stark contrast to the experiences we have today. Games are filled to the brim with things that you may never even find on your playthrough. The game genre that is most known for hiding stuff like this is collectathons. Banjo-Kazooie hides Jinjos all throughout its worlds in areas that are hidden enough to feel like you discovered them, but not so hidden that it feels unfair. Super Mario Odyssey is jam-packed with purple coins that guide you through your adventure and show you where you might need to explore next. But what's interesting about this is that exploration has now infected even the most linear of titles today. Sure, in Super Mario Bros., you could stumble upon a hidden underground room that has a few coins. But it wasn't until after The Legend of Zelda that we would see actual important things to discover within these secret areas. Something that is as simple as exploring was almost completely absent before Zelda reinvented the way we play games. And along with this newfound feeling of exploration came a new way of problem solving. Finding a problem in a game used to boil down to hitting the correct button or improving your skill. But with this new type of game came a new way of figuring out how to resolve your issues. If you came across a river in The Legend of Zelda, you would quickly realize that the solution to moving over it didn't boil down to just pushing the right button on your controller. You were missing a key piece of information that was preventing you from progressing. In this case, it's the fact that the raft allows you to traverse over water. If you stumbled into the repeating woods and couldn't reach the end, you knew it wasn't because you weren't going fast enough. Miyamoto in an interview once said, "The Legend of Zelda was our first game that forced players to think about what they should do next." I mean, in general, games before Zelda could be simplified down to a one-word objective. Galaga? Shoot. Pac-Man? Eat. Centipede? Shoot. Space Invaders? Shoot. Okay, there were a lot of shoot. But anyways, after The Legend of Zelda, that wasn't the case anymore. Games presented many problems and many objectives all throughout. One example of Nintendo reinforcing this idea of new objectives is the NPCs you can find around the map. These NPCs would say different things to give you some answers to the problems the game gave you. And it is these hints that solidify the idea that you need to find a solution to the problem you're facing, instead of just improving your skill. It's this kind of step-by-step problem solving that makes The Legend of Zelda fun today. All of this is not to say that the game is perfect. In today's standards, we just don't have a need for certain aspects of this game. One of the best examples of these unnecessary aspects comes from the game's artificial difficulty. When arcade games really started taking off, the general idea was that if games were very difficult, you could get kids to spend more quarters on your machine. The trick to these games is that the gameplay had to be hard, but always feel like improving was attainable. Basically, if you died, in your mind, you were guaranteed to do better the next time, assuming that your lemonade stand money hadn't run out. The issue with this approach when it comes to The Legend of Zelda is that the game shouldn't feel like it's based off skill. Unlike Zelda games today, the basic mechanics don't scale with the rest of the gameplay. In Breath of the Wild, there are endless ways to use the mechanics to make every interaction different. But back on the NES, you swing your sword, the enemy dies. So if the game makes you feel like you should just get good at the game, but makes you think that you are missing something, you end up with a clashing and frustrating experience. Now, not only does the difficulty in this game make for an aggravating experience, it also forces the game to directly contradict some of the design aspects that it was using so well. Take, for example, heart containers. Heart containers allow you to have more hearts and overall take more damage throughout the game. This would be in line with the sense of reward aspect we were talking about earlier, but if you happen to die on your adventure and decide to respawn, your hearts will only fill up to 3. And unlike future Zelda games where this feels like a mechanic, in this game it feels like the only reason to do this is to force the experience to take longer. But unfortunately, that isn't even the worst aspect of heart containers. If your health isn't completely full, then you aren't able to use the sword's energy beam, which makes everything sluggish and annoying. During my first ever playthrough, when I realized how this mechanic worked, I started actively avoiding the heart containers at any cost, until I realized that I needed them to get the white sword. The aspect of being full power to utilize the goddess's power is an interesting idea, and only being able to use the energy beam on full health feels good. But the fact that the game punishes you further after you already died and had to go back to the beginning feels pointless. And unfortunately, this is one of the Zelda games where this mechanic feels like it's working against you. Oh, also, I almost forgot. Oh, and one more thing that I have to mention is that the game and manual do face some translation errors. The Legend of Zelda is a magical experience, as well as a game design marvel. For a game to completely reinvent the way that we play every other game is completely unheard of in games today. And the experience even now feels fantastical in a lot of ways. So if you have never played this NES classic, then you should pick it up immediately and play for at least an hour. But with that being said, this game is held back by the ways of the past, And today, if you're looking for the perfect open world game, this one isn't it.
Alright, guys, I just wanted to say that although my review may have been a little negative towards the end, I don't actually hate The Legend of Zelda. This is my actual kitten, and her name is Princess Zelda. I do not actually hate The Legend of Zelda. Is that right, Zelda? Do you like that? Don't eat that. Don't eat that. Hey, cut that out. Oh, and I actually have the Master Sword tattooed, so